Hello, my name is Michael Tam, a GP academic at the University of New South Wales. This presentation is about some of the learning and teaching experiences that Dr. Joel Ree and I have gathered. Specifically, we'll be focusing on the use of technology to enhance learning activities. This talk will be framed around the good, the bad, and the ugly. Firstly, we'll have a look at the last 20 years. The first version of Microsoft PowerPoint was released all the way back in 1990, though it was not until 1995 with the version of PowerPoint for Windows 95 that it became ubiquitous. Moodle was first released in 2002, and the MOOCs were only released last year. To put this into the context of the Internet, the World Wide Web, which is the Internet to most of us, came into existence in 1991 at CERN. Google, 1997, and Blogger, the first major platform that allowed easy website construction without HTML coding knowledge, in 1999. We can think of this era as Web 1.0, passive with a clear difference between content creators and users. After 1999, we see the emergence of Web 2.0. Users are co-developers and content creators, the harnessing of collective intelligence, and software as web services. Wikipedia, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Google Docs. The devices that we use to access the internet has changed as well. Tablets. These devices have become so ubiquitous so quickly that it is almost inconceivable that the first iPad was only released 3 years ago. And the technology that I am particularly fond of, Prezi, was first released in 2009. I like Prezi because it allows the creation of presentations like this. First, the good. Using Prezi as a presentation platform for lectures and Google Docs for in-class collaborative small group work. I've been using Prezi rather than PowerPoint for most of my lectures to medical students, and I conducted an evaluation a little while ago using a self-reported questionnaire. On that scale, 1 is strongly disagree and 6 is strongly agree. I divided the results into 2 groups, agree, which is 5 and 6 on that scale, and disagree or ambivalent, which is 1 to 4. Using chi-square analysis, the following were statistically significant findings. The students reported that Prezi, as compared to PowerPoint, allowed them to better follow and understand the content, helped retain their concentration, and made the lecture more enjoyable. They also preferred it to PowerPoint. One of the qualitative student comments. We have been using Google Docs to facilitate 2 different forms of small group work in class. The first example is for short buzz groups, where the groups of up to 8 students quickly discuss and note down their thoughts over about 5 minutes. Previously, we used butcher's paper for this task, but now we use a specially crafted spreadsheet on Google Docs. The main benefit is that multiple students can simultaneously edit the document and see each other's contributions in real time. Here's a short video clip of it in action from a class in 2012. You can see the students adding their ideas in the columns. Evaluation using self-report questionnaires comparing the use of Google Docs to butcher's paper. The students perceived that this method was more efficient, was more legible, assisted their learning, and they preferred it to writing on butcher's paper. The second example of using Google Docs is in tutorial group presentations. In small groups, the students research some clinical questions over about 45 to 50 minutes and then present their findings to the rest of the class with a focus on management. Here, we used a crafted skeleton presentation on Google Docs and asked the students to flesh it out. We can see the original has only 5 slides and some questions. This now is a real presentation created by a group of students earlier in the year. On the left, you can see that students have included many new slides. They've included some information from clinical resources. The tools also allow students to flex their creativity. Student feedback. Qualities of the good methods. They were easy to use, integrated with the learning activities of the class, and got the students to do things and interact with each other. The bad. We'll describe two things that did not work well. Firstly, we tried using Google Docs for independent group work while students were on their GP placements. We created an online document that had 26 cases. Each student was allocated to be responsible to complete a case and to review another student's case. Here we see what the document looked like. There's some introductory material, and here's case 15, which is on breast cancer. We see there are some questions. Now, the student allocated to this case did a pretty good job. Here you can see that I gave the students some comments on the right. However, for every case that was completed, we have something like case 17, here it is, which is completely bare. We tried this over a couple of iterations and the results were the same. Some students engaged in the activity, but many did not. Back channel for lecture Q&A. The idea here is to allow students, especially those who may be shy, to ask questions in class. As I deliver the lecture, at set points I check whether there are any questions asked through the back channel. Initially, I used a freely open document in Google Docs. However, that didn't work well on iDevices, so I tried using a free chat room service. Lastly, I tried including my email address at difficult concept points in the lecture presentation. This instructional method basically didn't work. Students found it distracting to the flow of the lecture, trying to grapple with technology with Google Docs and Chazzy. Email had the lowest barrier of use given that most students have smartphones, computers, or tablets in class, but in that case, no one actually sent me an email. Student comment, gimmicky, and perhaps it makes sense. If we are trying to create a sense of relationship between the learner and teacher, using back channel increases the distance rather than decreases it. Qualities of the bad methods: distracted rather than enabled student learning, seen as separate to the learning activity, and imparted an additional cognitive load to the learning, having to learn how to use the technology in addition to the learning outcomes of the activity. And the ugly. These aren't things that are good or bad, but just clunky. Interestingly, both relate to audience response technology. The first is a service called Poll Anywhere. We were interested in it as our school doesn't own any clickers. This ad from their website explains how it works.
Respond, just text message the number on screen. Or use a custom URL to respond in the web app. You can even use Twitter if that's what you're into. As people respond, results are embedded instantly into your presentation, in real time.
Pretty cool, right? Well, the first time I used it, it simply didn't work right. It worked for the people who SMS'd, but the mobile side for people with smartphones didn't. After I randomly fiddled with something, it did work a bit like the video, but the magic was lost. In the second example, we used the keypad clickers to use a script concordance test as a real-time learning activity. Effectively, as the learning activity progressed, students in class answered questions on clinical reasoning. There was a running tally board, and we could examine why students may have made different choices to the expert panel. It mostly worked well, except we were pushing the technology to its limits. Lots of questions, running tallies. In 2 out of 4 classes, the software platform would repeatedly crash. The Mexican standoff in the film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, reminds me of the tension that faces potentially good technologies during implementation. New technologies mean new failure modes. Glitches are ugly. Thorough attempts to minimize the ugly can result in the processes of the learning activity competing with the learning objectives. This is bad. Our final reflections: technological innovations can offer learning opportunities that were previously unavailable, but their use may not actually improve learning outcomes. I would be wary of introducing technological enhancements for the sake of doing so, unless there were good pedagogical reasons. Always, student feedback and analysis is vital. I would also like to offer a word of caution that there is a difference between delighting students and empowering them to learn. Quantitative student satisfaction surveys need to be considered critically. qualitative feedback may be more useful. For instance, the feedback I received on back channel in lectures was generally positive in the satisfaction survey items, even though nobody really used it and the qualitative comments were negative. Lastly, do not assume that students are digital natives. Just because they know how to use Google and Facebook doesn't mean that they are interested in e-learning technologies. Interestingly, in our various analyses, we consistently find that around 10 to 20% of students prefer low-tech alternatives. Thank you.